Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
The 1980s, an era of big hair, big music, and big amounts of drug use. But enough about the Freebirds. Now you can hold the power of 80s wrestling in the palm of your hand with 80s Mania Wrestling Returns, available on iOS and Android devices. It's a booking simulator meets collectible card game. Collect hundreds of different cards featuring wrestlers, match types, venues, and more to create the ultimate nostalgic wrestling federation. This game is constantly being updated, and it just got the coolest update of all because now I'm in it. If you want the Wregret Manager card for your very own, just download 80s Mania Wrestling Returns, enter the cheat code REGRET, and it's yours. 80s Mania Wrestling Returns is the official sponsor for my 1980s themed classic pay-per-view reviews, so now enjoy my take on Starrcade 83. Hey everyone, Brian Zane here with another classic pay-per-view review as nominated by my Patreon backers. Now, at the end of my Insurrection 02 review a few weeks ago, I basically said I was going to keep it open-ended, kind of mysterious as to which show I was going to be doing. A lot of people guessed I'd be reviewing Armageddon 03 because I referenced a line from the Evolution theme in that little tease. Basically, I said it was going to be a mystery because I legit didn't know what show I was going to be doing next. It didn't really come to me as I was putting this that review together. But when I made it home from England, I decided I would review Starrcade 1983 from Jim Crockett Promotions and the National Wrestling Alliance, November 24th, 1983 at the Greensboro Coliseum in North Carolina. This show is nominated by Joel Ma over on Patreon. The announcers in this show called it a new aura, or they might have meant new era, a new wave. They called it the biggest wrestling event to occur anywhere. And you know, they may have certainly had a point. This is pretty much the inaugural pay-per-view event for Jim Crockett Promotions, or if you want to be more technical, it's the first wrestling event that they broadcast on closed circuit television, which was the predecessor to pay-per-view, the traditional pay-per-view format. And this show certainly predates WrestleMania by a couple of years, and that was the World Wrestling Federation's first closed circuit event. And of course, Starrcade would become Jim Crockett Promotions and later WCW's flagship event annually. It was their equivalent of WrestleMania, and they would carry on Starrcade until the end of the company's existence. So, you know, people talk about the significance of WrestleMania and the impact that show had on the industry, but I think it's safe to say that if there were no Starrcade, there would likely also be no WrestleMania. Just under 16,000 people in attendance, a $500,000 gate according to my research. Gordon Soley and Bob Caudle are on commentary for this show. Real quick, the poster board behind them reminds me to bring this point up. Why, I get, you know, the show is called Flair for the Gold. That was kind of the sub-headline for this whole event. It was whole built around Ric Flair and his quest to become the champion. I get that, and I get why they would call it Flair for the Gold, but why would you have the traditional spelling? You can see on the poster board in the crow's nest where the announcers are, it's spelled F-L-A-R-E. I always assumed it was F-L-A-I-R because of the obvious play on words, hey, it's Ric Flair. I guess they didn't want to make it too obvious that this is Ric Flair's night. Anything could still happen in professional wrestling, but I think it was kind of weird that if you're going to have that play on words, that pun, then why wouldn't you spell it like Ric Flair's last name? The network version of Starrcade 83 opens up right at the beginning of this first match here. There's no opening package, there's no, hello everyone, I'm Bob Caudle and Gordon Soley. It just goes right into this first match of the Masked Assassins 1 and 2 versus the Mid-Atlantic champion Rufus R. Freight Train Jones and his partner Bugsy McGraw. I'll get to those guys in a little bit, but first, the Assassins, a long-standing team of professional wrestling, going all the way back to the 60s at this point with Jody Hamilton and Tom Renesto. However, in this case, Assassin number 2 was played not by Renesto, but by a future Hercules Hernandez. A little bit of trivia there. Jones is the current Mid-Atlantic champion, like I said, and McGraw is kind of a goofy fellow based on everything he's doing in this match. He's like kind of a goofy dancing kind of guy, and Rufus is shucking and jiving to the maximum every time he's in the ring there. Also, one thing about McGraw I noticed, he's not wearing boots. He's wearing sneakers of some kind. I never thought I would see a wrestler of this vintage with such a disdain for, you know, tradition, but you know, he was kind of a wacky character, so maybe that was part of the gimmick. Who knows? The heels get the advantage when Assassin number 1 produces a foreign object and rakes Rufus in the eyes with it, allowing the Assassins to get one over on them. Bugsy gets the hot tag, and he is a house of wacky fire. Assassin number 1 gets the blind tag in off the ropes and rolls up an unwitting McGraw to win the match. I'm going to give this one 1 star out of 4. It was decent. It didn't really get into a second gear. It was kind of a short and sweet kind of deal just to get the fans hyped up. With the faces, Jones and McGraw doing all their goofy stuff, I mean, that's going to get the crowd hyped up in that kind of way. The quality of tag matches will certainly improve as the night goes on. We get our first glimpse of the backstage area, and oh my god, look at that young-ass Tony Schiavone. I don't even think he's 25 years old at this point in Starrcade 83. Low-key big hog in the house doing the backstage interviews with the wrestlers. We'll be seeing him a lot later in the night. Our next matchup, Johnny Weaver and Scott Let's Go McGee versus Kevin Sullivan and Mark Lewin, who's accompanied by his manager, Gary Hart. McGee is the one man smart enough out of all 4 guys to be having knee pads. Good for him. Save your knees, kid. I do enjoy seeing a young Kevin Sullivan here. This is around the time he's doing his, like, is he not a Satanist gimmick? And Sully just lays it right out. In the middle of the match, he says, you know, some people accuse him of being a druid in the most matter-of-fact, like, well, here it is, kind of voice I've ever heard someone use to describe someone who may or may not be a Satanist or a cultist, that sort of thing. Sick counter by McGee out of the wrist lock where he steps up on Lewin's leg to break out of the hold. I've never seen it done that way before. It's such a subtle thing. Like, you don't see that today, but at least not without a bunch of flips accompanying it. But that was really kind of cool, subtle escape of the hold there. Because he is the young apprentice to Johnny Weaver, McGee takes all the heat in this match. At one point, there's the classic spot where the referee misses the babyface hot tag and the ref reprimands Johnny and tells him to go back to the corner. Caudle misses the fact that, you know, the tag was invalid because the ref didn't see it. He's like, oh, he's got to step over the top rope. He can't go through the middle. That's why the tag didn't count. No, that's not why the tag didn't count, Bob. More weird commentary here because Weaver gets the hot tag and he hits the bulldog on Kevin Sullivan, and Sully calls it the Oklahoma Stampede. That's not even the same class of move. Weaver gets his arm worked over. I do enjoy this old school spot here where Sullivan and Lewin both have him in a wrist lock and walk in a circle like a bat spin to double wrist lock, arm wrench kind of thing. Such an old school move, and like I love seeing something like that. And then Gary Hart holds down Weaver along with Sullivan to allow Mark Lewin to hit a knee drop from the top rope into his back to win the matchup. I'm going to give it 1.5 stars. It was, I think, a better story told than the preceding tag team match that we saw earlier with the Assassins, etc. After the match, Hart produces a foreign object of some kind. Lewin hits McGee in the head with it, and he's bleeding profusely. 2 matches in, and we got someone bleeding like a stuck pig. This is 80s wrestling in a nutshell. Angelo Mosca, who's going to be refereeing the tag title match later in the night, he tries to break it up, but he's hit with the object as well, and so his arm is bleeding. And that's the end of that segment there. We then go ringside to see Barbara Cleary, who I don't think we see too much of before or after this show. She is kind of the ringside interviewer, mostly interviewing fans who are there at the show to get their take on what's happening and how they're enjoying the show. She interviews the Estes family in the front row, who drove almost 200 miles to see it, and they are psyched. Backstage, Tony Schiavone is interviewing a room full of champions. He is surrounded by the U.S. champion Greg Valentine, the NWA World Tag Team champs, the Brisco brothers, that's Jack and Jerry by the way, and the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion Harley Race. And Race says he's been getting some insight from his friends about what Flair's strengths and weaknesses are. And he tells, Race says, Flair, I know your shortcomings. I'm going to exploit them in our cage match later tonight. It's definitely not the last time we'll be seeing Harley Race on the microphone during this show. Up next, Carlos Colon versus Abdullah the Butcher. Oh boy, and I thought there was a lot of blood in the last match we just saw. This is a continuation of the feud that these two have had in Puerto Rico. They mention frequently on commentary, this match has been banned in Puerto Rico because the last time they did battle down there, a riot broke out and the match was thrown out. So a typical Puerto Rico main event match, it sounds like. Abby sticks Carlos with a foreign object just a few seconds in. Like, they barely lock up before Abdullah the Butcher, sticks him in the head with some foreign object. Carlos and Abby are fighting in the corner. Carlos is able to pull the foreign object out of Abdullah the Butcher's pants and starts hitting him with it, and now Abdullah the Butcher is bleeding. If Carlos is bleeding in this matchup, I really couldn't tell because he was hit a few times in the head with it, but I don't think I saw him bleed. But Abdullah, it was way more noticeable. You can even see a shot of, like, when Carlos hits him in the head, you see some blood splash off his head. It's so gross. Carlos starts biting Abby's forehead, and I guess it's an ODQ match because the referee's letting all this stuff slide. The Butcher kicks out of a move, and then Colon lands on the referee. Then Abdullah hits the referee with an elbow drop, so he's dead for a while. I figured that was going to be the end of the match. It's going to get thrown out, but no, it keeps going. Carlos gets the figure 4 locked in, and suddenly a man in a powder blue tuxedo runs in and hits Carlos with a shoe or something, some kind of foreign object, and it turns out in commentary they reveal it's Hugo Savinovich, the future commentator for the Spanish announced team in WWE. Then after that, the Butcher covers Colon, and the referee revives, counts to 3, and that's the matchup. I'm going to give it 1.5 stars. For as short as it was, I do give them credit for cramming as much chaos and violence into this matchup as they possibly could. I think this is a sub 5-minute match, and they were able to do a lot of crazy stuff. So I give them extra points for making that work in the allotted time. Backstage, Schiavone interviews Angelo Mosca, whose elbow is all bandaged up after the attack he suffered at the hands of Mark Lewin and Kevin Sullivan and Gary Hart after match 2. He gets all riled up about what happens to Scott McGee. Poor Scott McGee. He reminds me of my son. Meanwhile, Scott McGee is sitting next to him, slumped over, half dead, covered in blood. Is no one checking on this poor guy? No one's going to give him a wet rag to wipe that shit off? No one's going to give him a cold compress or a bandage? Literally nothing. It's like he just dragged his body here, boom, he's dead. Let me talk to you about how this is such the worst thing ever. I'm like, can someone check on him? We go back to ringside to see Barbara Cleary interviewing some lady fans to talk about their experience, what they think of the show so far, who they think is going to win the main event. This shot is especially hard to watch because it suffers in 3 ways. It's a triple whammy. It's out of focus, it's overexposed, and they are in desperate need of a white balance. We get another tag team match here as Wahoo McDaniel and Mark Youngblood take on the team of Bob Orton and Dick Slater. It's the first time we see matchup graphics this whole show. It's also our first use of the overhead top-down camera angle from the rafters, which we will not see again until the main event, oddly enough. Wahoo, of course, is a former U.S. champion, long-standing veteran in this territory, really helped put Ric Flair on the map in the 70s, among other accolades. Mark Youngblood, brother of Jay and Chris, the son of Ricky Romero, so the Youngbloods are in full force here at Starrcade 83. Slater actually is going to be the U.S. champion 1 month from this show. He's going to beat Greg Valentine for it, and he's actually listed in my top 8 one-time U.S. champions, so check that list out if you want to see more about Dick Slater and his run there. Bob Orton is his partner, and he's 33 years old here, and it's crazy to think about that at that age, his son Randy is already a multiple-time world champion. It's crazy how wrestling works sometimes. Now, Orton and Slater are the team that collected a $25,000 bounty that the NWA World Champion Harley Race had put on Ric Flair's head over the summer. They hit him with a double pile driver back in August, and so then Flair announced his retirement at the time, but he came back for Starrcade, obviously. But yeah, Orton and Slater, they're known for being the guys who try to put Ric Flair out of wrestling, and they collected a $25,000 bounty. Slater goes over the top rope early on, and he and Orton try to argue that Youngblood threw him over the top, but the referee dismisses it and says it was Slater's own momentum that put him over. Oh, that finicky over-the-top rule. It's never not confusing during this time period in the company. Youngblood takes all the heat in this one. Orton dumps him on his back over the barricade on the outside, just onto his back. It looks so stiff. Youngblood makes the hot tag after Orton accidentally bumps into him, trying to cut him off, and that allows Youngblood to get the momentum needed to tag in Wahoo. Not very often you see that kind of thing happen. I actually like that little detail there. Youngblood's back into the ring with a flurry of drop kicks, but the last one misses thanks to a save from Slater. A super play from Bob Orton to Youngblood. Wahoo tries to break up the pin, and the ref counts to 3 anyway. It's a real photo finish in that one, because if you look closely, I think Wahoo actually breaks up the pin just before the referee makes a 3 count by like a couple of frames. It's a couple of nanosecond difference. But oh well, the decision stands, and the heels win here. I'm going to give it 2 stars out of 4. It's the best match of the night so far. Easily the best tag team match up to this point, but we're not done yet with that. Really good story told in the ring. I really enjoyed the finish, except for Wahoo coming at the end and coming a little early to break things up. That was kind of a nitpick, though. After the match, Slater and Orton just destroy Wahoo McDaniel's arm over the apron, and Orton with a knee drop from the top rope to the outside. That looked particularly devastating. Slater was going to do it, and then he had second thoughts. Like, nope, I'm going down for the apron and just do an axe handle, and that's easier for me. I'll let Orton handle the one from the top rope. Backstage, Schiavone interviews Ric Flair, Jay Youngblood, and Ricky Steamboat about their respective title matches. All 3 men are very subdued here. They're taking things very seriously in this matchup, especially Ric Flair. And that was the weirdest thing to me, to hear him sound so humble and quiet and soft-spoken. That is the opposite of Ric Flair. And he's full nature boy here, so it's just weird that we don't get to see him do the mean, woo, you know, whatever kind of thing. He's not amped up like we would see him in later years. He would grow into that over time, but here he's still very soft-spoken. This is my favorite part of the show. Ringside, Barbara Cleary interviews the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, but you can't hear what he's saying, Daddy, because the microphone keeps dying. It's just like as soon as she points the microphone to his face.
How do you feel?
It's a big thrill to be in such a great Flair for the gold.
He starts cutting what looks to be the promo of his life. He is getting all fired up and into it. And it's like most of his words you just can't hear because the microphone just keeps dying. Every once in a while, you'll hear some semblance of sound, like it cuts in for a second, and back out, it dies. And Gordon solely has to play the role of interpreter, which is just hilarious. He's like, Dusty Rhodes here, he's saying he's really happy to be here at Starrcade, and he wants to challenge the winner. It's like, if I were Jim Crockett running this show and watching this, I'd be shitting bricks, because this is just chaos. Like, just dump. Get out of this segment. This is no, we have to move on to the next matchup. We'll make up for it later, and they do. But it's just the visual of Dusty cutting this fiery promo. You can't hear a word he's saying, and Gordon's trying to talk over him. This was madness, and I loved it.
Well, if you can read his lips, you can tell what he's saying.
It's title versus mask up next, as the great Kabuki, the NWA TV champion, alongside Gary Hart, defends against Charlie Brown from Out of Town, who of course is the Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant under a very obvious mask. The story here is Kabuki had beaten Jimmy Valiant in a loser leaves town matchup, and then not too long after that, Valiant returns as Charlie Brown from Out of Town, and everyone knows it's Valiant. It's as clear as day, but no one can prove it, and that's the whole point of this matchup here, is that Kabuki and Hart want to unmask Jimmy Valiant here and prove to the world he is in fact who they say he is. It's that time-honored tradition. We've seen it before. We've seen it with Charlie Brown. We see it with the Midnight Rider. We see it with Yellow Dog. We see it with Mr. America. The guy under a very obvious mask to conceal his identity when everyone knows who it is and does nothing to change his style or basic mannerisms. That's a time-tested tradition in professional wrestling. Early on, Brown hits Kabuki with a chair on the outside and crotches him in the ring post, giving the ring post itis, as Anderson and Gallows might say today, but the referee does nothing about it. He sees it clear as day. Charlie Brown with a sleeper, but Kabuki fights out of it and puts Brown in the claw hold. Then Brown just kind of dances his way out of it. And I've never seen a backdrop before where both guys run at each other. That was scary to see, but both guys are running toward each other, and then Charlie Brown gets down and lifts up Kabuki. That was a weird move. Back to the claw for Kabuki, and then Brown boogie woogies his way out of it again, but he's hurting too much. He tries to whip Kabuki into the corner, but his head's hurting too much. He's woozy. He's dazed. He cannot follow up with that. Then he's back into the claw hold. Kabuki's working this claw hold really well and putting it over as this devastating move. The referee drops a hand 3 times. It goes down 3 times. Then the referee goes for a 3 count, and then Charlie Brown from Out of Town kicks out at 2. That was a weird little spot there. Brown fights back again. Kabuki goes for a corner drop kick, but he misses. Brown with the elbow drop, not even a top rope elbow drop or nothing, he just does a simple elbow drop, beats Kabuki for the championship. I'm going to give this one 2 stars out of 4. It was a very entertaining matchup here. Good job by Kabuki again to work the claw hold, really put it over. And, you know, in spite of all the dancing and goofy shit that Valiant Charlie Brown was doing in the matchup here, at time when it mattered, he still put it over as a move that was to be feared, because then he was, you know, the amount he was selling it when he wasn't doing the shucking and jiving and the dancing and stuff, which is fine. You know, that was, I think, when he took the time to sell it, I think it really counted then. But the whole point of keeping the mask on Valiant, which, you know, Kabuki was spending the whole match trying to rip off before the finish anyway, it would all prove to be moot, because by January, Valiant would vacate the title when he dropped the Charlie Brown gimmick, and then in March they would have a tournament to determine a new champion, which Mark Youngblood would win. We go backstage to see Tony Schiavone once again with Harley Race, who is now joined by Orton and Slater, who take great pride in what they did to Wahoo McDaniel's arm earlier in the night. Then we go to the Crow's Nest, where the announcers are. This time it's Barbara Cleary interviewing Dusty Rhodes. This time where the microphones are working, he gets to do the promo that he cut earlier. He gets to do a redo, basically, and now you can hear what he's saying. We then go to the dog collar match, where Greg Valentine, the U.S. champion, goes up against Roddy Piper. This is a non-title match, which I was not aware of until the match was was over, and they had to clarify that on commentary. But the story here is Valentine had beat Piper for the championship some months ago. During that match, Piper got an ear injury, a legitimate ear injury, which caused the referee to throw the match out. And so that's what led to this blood feud here. And so the Valentine strategy is going to be going for the ear throughout the whole thing. The match begins with a tug of war by the necks of both men. They're both leaning back and they're just staring at each other as they're trying to get closer, trying to gain a psychological advantage before they just start slugging each other. They don't care about the chain at that point. Piper gets the advantage early on, but then Valentine strikes back, goes for the ear, like I said. Piper wraps the chain around Valentine's mouth and his face at one point in a comeback, which looks great there. He wraps the chain around the turnbuckle post and traps Valentine in the corner. Valentine starts bleeding profusely after getting bit in the forehead by Piper. They fight on the apron, and the referee tries to break them up for whatever reason in this no DQ matchup. That allows Valentine to regain the advantage over Piper. Piper is just, like I said, both men are bleeding buckets here from their respective wounds. Piper is wobbly. He is off balance due to the injured ear. The word equilibrium is used often during this match by commentary, but Piper is able to mount a comeback. Both men just wail on each other now. It's not even, forget any kind of holds or anything like that. Forget the wrestling thrown out the window here. This is a Pier 6 brawl, as one might say. There's a double down after a suplex. Piper fights out of the sleeper by decking Greg in the head with a chain-wrapped fist. Valentine goes for a dive, but Piper pulls him down with a chain and hits him in the throat on the way down. Some more punches just to get the exclamation point. Piper hooks Valentine's legs, ties them up like a steer with the chain and hooks his legs, pins him, and wins. So again, he wins the match, but not the championship. After the match there, Piper is just attacked by Valentine some more, chokes him out with the chain. Piper is able to leave on his own, under his own power after Valentine leaves there. I'm going to give this one 3.5 stars out of 4. It's a great physical, intense match, violent match, told the best story, I think, out of everything on this show. Even more so, I think, than the main event. To me, this was the match of the night. The good story, the ear being attacked and how Piper sold it and reacted to it. I loved it all. Piper would never get the title back. This was the end of their feud because right after this, right after Starrcade 83, Piper would go on to the World Wrestling Federation, and the rest is history. And of course, he would be going to the WWF with a lot less hearing because this whole angle with he and Valentine with the ear injury that began this whole thing, and the in this match here, the dog collar match, he would lose about 50 to 75% of his hearing from what I researched about this, and that was on a permanent hear loss. So he was definitely worse for wear after this angle. Backstage, Shivani interviews Flair once again, along with Wahoo McDaniel, who is now his arms all iced and bandaged up. Well, thank God someone took care of that guy. Meanwhile, Scott and McGee's probably bled out and is dead on the floor at this point. We then go to ringside. Barbara Cleary interviews Don Kernoodle, former tag team champion with Sergeant Slaughter, who offers up his picks for the tag team and world title matches. And speaking of which, we go right now to the NWA World Tag Title match, as Jack and Jerry, don't call them Mark and Jay, they are the Brisco brothers, taking on Jay Youngblood and Ricky Steamboat. These two teams have been waging war for months, pretty much the entirety of 1983, over the tag titles, and they've been switching back and forth a couple of times in the process. Special referee for this matchup here is Angelo Mosca, who we've seen a couple of times throughout the night by this point. I love Jerry Brisco during his introduction here because he just stands at the top turnbuckle, straight as an arrow, perfectly still, and then when his name is called, then he jumps down and does a pose. That is a very unique intro, just the way he did it. And I would love to see that done today. In fact, they mentioned the titles can change hands on a disqualification in this matchup. So will they? Time will tell. The match starts off slow and steady. The Briscoes eventually get on top and work Steamboat over for several minutes until Ricky overpowers Jerry and slams him down. And I love Jerry's selling. It's just so great here. It's almost the point of farce, but it's just like the way he flops around and stuff. It's like I can totally see him, not too long after this, like 15 years later, when he's one of the Stooges with Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson, and his mannerisms there. It's like, oh my God, this is Jerry Brisco. Like, he hasn't changed a bit between 83 and 98. Hot tag. Briscoes regain the advantage, though, against Jay Youngblood. Jerry Brisco gets in Mosca's face and regrets it immediately. Steamboat and Youngblood with a creative double team move where Steamboat does a military press and drops Jay onto Jerry and puts them away for a 3 count to win back the titles for a 5th time. And this is something we've seen a lot so far in this show. After the match, the heels beat down the baby faces. The Briscoes jump the new tag team champions after the match. They throw Mosca into the corner, and he looks really rough, that landing there. But Mosca fights back and catches Jack in midair. The champions fight back and chase the Briscoes off. That is something I wish we didn't see so much of in this show, was like heel beatdown to get their heat back after they lose. I'm going to give this one 2.5 stars. It started out really slow for me, but definitely picked up and got much more entertaining as the matchup went on. I will admit, I'm a bad fan. I haven't seen a whole lot of the Briscoes work before this match, but I really enjoyed what they did here. I was entertained, especially by Jerry Brisco. Very subtle heel work while still being incredibly athletic and quick. Great stuff. However, Ricky and Jay, the good times, this is their 5th time holding the tag team titles, but they would vacate the belts literally just a month later when Steamboat retired from professional wrestling. Of course, that retirement was not long lasting. It's the part of the show where everyone tries to kill time while they set up the cage for the main event. Backstage, Tony Schiavone interviews Charlie Brown, Roddy Piper, and the new tag champs Steamboat and Youngblood. Bob and Gordon in the Crow's Nest kill a lot of time to allow the cage to be built. I'm surprised we don't get to see shots of them putting it up. It's just like this one shot of Bob Caudle and Gordon Soley just talking and talking and talking while this is going on. We then get another Barbara Cleary, Dusty Rhodes joint in the crowd, and then the national anthems performed by James Tiny Weeks and the home of the Brave. It's time now for the main event. The reason everyone is here, I mean literally, the guy's name is in the name of the show, Flair for the Gold. NWA World's title match in a steel cage as Harley Race defends against Ric Flair. This whole thing was part of a massive campaign to really build Flair up as a credible world champion, because apparently his last 2 reigns were not so hot. Race at this point, 7-time world champion. Flair, a 2-time world champion. In June of '83, Harley Race beat Flair for the title for the 7th time in St. Louis, and since then the whole mission has been the chase by Ric Flair to get the championship back. Harley Race put a bounty on Ric Flair's head, $25,000, as I mentioned earlier. Orton and Slater did collect the bounty there, and so Flair had retired for a bit, but came back. It's an angle that would replicate many years later on Raw when Triple H put a bounty on Goldberg's head during Goldberg's first run in the company there. Ric Flair is the only one out of anyone on the show who gets any kind of showy entrance on this event. He's got the music playing, the classic theme, you got the disco ball going, got some laser lights in the ceiling you can barely make out on the video here. Then when he shows up, he's got the little poof of pyro, the classic blue robe. It's just a great classic, just yet at the same time very epic for the time moment for Ric Flair here. And Harley does get an entrance as well. He gets time to kind of walk out and kind of soak in all the booze and everything. But that's about it as far as like entrances go, because no one else in this show gets an entrance. Gene Kiniski, former world champion, is the special referee in this matchup here and is the bane of my existence during this matchup, because he seems to be unaware of the rules of this no disqualification match, being there are no rules. He keeps inserting himself into this matchup here. I'm going to keep bringing it up because I think it's worth talking about. Flair works the headlock for a good while as the match begins. Harley eventually works the head and neck of Flair, true to his game plan that he made clear in the interviews before. He hits Flair with a pile driver and a neck breaker, but Flair keeps kicking out, so you see the resilience of Flair here. We finally get another overhead shot of the ring as the match goes on. All it does for me is to show how disgusting and filthy the canvas is by the end of the night. Race throws Flair face first into the cage a number of times. Flair is bleeding, the crimson mask and dyeing his hair blood red at this point. Kiniski interjecting himself once again. He does not want Flair to keep using, he doesn't want Race to keep using the cage as a weapon, and this allows for Flair to make a comeback. He drives Harley into the cage wall, and now Race is bleeding, and Flair's getting all his woos back in.
But I think you're right.
At one point, Race counters a suplex attempt by Flair and just lands on top of him and covers him. As Kiniski's making the count, the camera cuts away to a shot where you can't even see the wrestlers. Imagine if that were the finish and you couldn't see it. That would have been just devastating. Then later on, Kiniski grabs Race by the hair. Come on, you're killing me here. Gordon Soley can't stop putting over Gene Kiniski and how good of a job he's doing as a referee, and I have to disagree, because it's a no DQ match, and for a no DQ match, you sure see a referee trying to enforce a lot of these rules that seem to be in place. Race. Race headbutts Kiniski while he's got Flair in a headlock. That's some good-ass multitasking. But then Flair fights back, goes to the top rope, and hits Race with what I believe is supposed to be a crossbody, but it almost turns into like a super head scissors off the top rope because he doesn't quite make the contact there. But he takes down Race, pins him, and wins the championship. It's one of the only times that Flair ever hit something from the top rope. Off the top of my head, I know he won. He beat Carlito for the IC championship decades later by hitting Carlito off the top rope with something. So it was kind of, the circle was now complete. I'm going to give this one 2.5 stars. It sounds really harsh given the men involved and the story involved, but the stuff with Gene Kiniski as the referee really got to me, and really it took me out of the match a lot and dinged it, for me, at least 0.5 star rating. It just irked me in this no disqualification cage match that was frequently interrupted by the referee trying to enforce the rules. Like, if I'm, okay, and even context aside, if I'm like watching Starrcade for the first time, if I'm making the trip to Greensboro, North Carolina to see this show, and I want to see Flair beat the piss out of Harley Race, or just in general 2 men beating the piss out of each other, why I would not want to see the referee keep doing this and getting involved. That took me out of the thing, and just took me out of the whole story, this whole blood feud here. Why is the referee getting interjected? Was he not briefed on the rules of what was going on here? Briefed on his role in this? They made it work. It was still a very solid match. The referee bullshit aside. The locker room clears out to help Flair celebrate, including Flair's wife at the time comes in to celebrate with him as well. Then after the match, go back to the dressing room. The whole last like 20 minutes of this show on the network is all post-show analysis and all this killing time in interviews. We go backstage where we see Flair having this very emotional promo. He's joined by Ricky Steamboat, who congratulates him. Dusty Rhodes says they will wage war in the future that day. We get Harley Race backstage, who says this night was arranged for Flair. He says he wants another shot of the gold, and technically he would get another shot because of a few months after this, he would actually win the belt for an 8th time, going against Ric Flair in New Zealand. But then 3 days later in Singapore, Flair would get the belt back from Race, and according to my research, the NWA does not recognize Harley Race's 3-day title win, so technically he's still a 7-time world champion. We get one more promo from Flair and Steamboat and Youngblood. Flair ruins the whole mystique of Charlie Brown from out of town, and that's how we end the show.
We wouldn't be here, and I'm talking about the 3 of us, or Roddy Piper, or Wahoo, or Rufus, or Jimmy Valiant, or...
My final grade for Starrcade 1983 is going to be a B-. You know, those first few matches, in particular, the first 2 tag team matches, didn't really do much for me, and I think there was way too much Gene Kiniski involved in the main event of this world title match that had all this stuff riding on it. But beyond that, I think from Orton, Slater versus Youngblood and McDaniels on to the end of the show, I think it was a really strong show. In particular, dog collar match with Piper and Valentine, amazing match. Kabuki versus Charlie Brown, it was silly, but it was still entertaining. Tag title match with the Briscos and Steamboat and Youngblood. And of course, Flair versus Race. Again, referee bullshit aside. For, again, the first inaugural Starrcade, the first closed circuit event in wrestling, predating WrestleMania by 2 years. This was a big, first step in the right direction in the evolution of wrestling. Yes, there were some technical issues, but you know what? That's live TV, and that's just bound to happen, so I'm not going to fault them too much for that. Well, I hope you enjoyed my review of Starrcade 83, folks. If you want to play a role in determining which classic shows I review in the future, be they good, bad, or somewhere in between, go to patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret. Become a $10 backer or above, and you'll have the chance to nominate shows for me to review in the future. Next time on the Classic Review segment, we are jumping several decades ahead to a show that is very near and dear to my heart. It's No Mercy 2008. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.